Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. It started with a simple question, one I couldn't shake off. What if something from the past has been waiting all along? I was walking through the woods just like any other day. It was the kind of day where everything feels familiar. The wind rustled gently through the trees, the air still with the kind of quiet that is almost unnatural. The woods had always been like this, peaceful. At least, that is how I remembered them. But this time, there was something off. Something I couldn't quite place. I had always walked this trail, the one that wound its way through the dense forest near the edge of town. No one really came here anymore. It was a forgotten place, one of those old paths that locals once used but now ignored. The leaves beneath my feet were damp from the morning dew, and the scent of pine and wet earth filled the air. Yet, there was something about the way the trees leaned and that felt different, almost as if they were watching me. I paused for a moment, glancing around. The path was narrow, tangled with roots and overgrown bushes. Everything felt as it always had felt, but not unsettling. But that is when I saw it, a small, barely visible trail that seemed to peel off the main path. I didn't remember it being there before. Curiosity tugged at me. The thought of exploring it was strange, but something about it felt like it was calling me. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if something was pulling at the edges of reality. I stood there for a long time, staring at the fork in the path, before I finally took a step toward it. The moment my foot touched the new trail, a shiver ran down my spine. It was as though the ground beneath me had changed, as if I had crossed some invisible boundary. The trees on either side of me seemed to lean closer, their trunks twisting like gnarled fingers reaching for me. I glanced over my shoulder. The main path was still there, visible through the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was slipping away, becoming distant. I continued, each step heavier than the last. The path was hardly a path at all, just a series of jagged stones and cracked earth. The air grew colder, and the silence was oppressive, the usual chirping of birds and rustling of leaves absent. Then I heard it. A sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, just the trees creaking, but no. It was something else. A whisper, faint but clear, like someone was murmuring just beyond my hearing. I stopped, heart pounding, and strained my ears. But there was nothing. Just my breath, quick and shallow, and the heavy silence. Maybe it is nothing, I thought. Maybe I am just hearing things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The trail twisted on, leading deeper into the woods. As I walked, the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, as if the earth itself was constantly changing. The leaves crackled, louder now, as if they were being crushed underfoot by something or someone else. I kept walking. Then came the first real sign. At first, it was subtle and strange. I could smell, like something had decayed nearby. It caught in my throat, and I quickly looked around. There was nothing, just the path and the trees. But the smell grew stronger. I kept telling myself it was just the woods, that it was natural. But it wasn't. Something was wrong. The air felt wrong. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder this time. It was unmistakable, a voice, though I couldn't make out the words. I quickened my pace, the sound of my boots crunching on the earth now feeling much too loud. The trees seemed to close in on me, the branches stretching toward the sky in a tangle of sharp, dark silhouettes. My skin prickled as the temperature dropped. It was a cold that sank into your bones, the kind that didn't make sense. The sun was still high in the sky, but the woods had become unnervingly dark. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I turned. No one. The path was empty, and the forest felt as still as it had been before. It is just my mind, I told myself. You're reimagining things. But then I heard the footsteps again, closer now. I couldn't ignore it. They weren't just sounds in the wind anymore. These were real steps. And they were following me. I started walking faster, then broke into a jog. My breath became uneven as I pushed myself forward. The path ahead blurred with fear, my mind racing. What is this place? What is behind me? I reached a clearing, and for a moment I thought I'd found my way out. But instead of the open sky, I was met with a scene that shouldn't have been there, a shattered stone archway half buried in dirt. It was like something from another time. I stepped closer, and the air grew colder still. The whispering was louder now, so loud I could hear it in my chest, vibrating through my bones. The footsteps had stopped, and in their place there was silence. The oppressive kind, where you couldn't even hear your own heartbeat. I looked up, and that is when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the archway. I froze. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the figure just beyond the broken archway. It wasn't he moving, not at first. The figure was tall, draped in shadows that seemed to shift and stretch unnaturally even in the dim light. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape and was waiting for me. My heart was pounding in my ears, so loud that I could barely hear the faint whispers anymore. But I could feel them swirling around me, suffocating the air with a presence that was far more ancient than anything I could comprehend. For a long moment, I stood motionless, unsure whether to run or approach. The figure S-form was odd, blurry in some places, like a mirage that refused to solidify. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to escape this path, but my feet were stuck in place. Then the figure moved. It was slow, deliberate, and each step echoed in the air like the beat of a drum. The way it moved wasn't natural. It glided, its feet barely touching the ground, as if the very earth was unwilling to bear its weight. I took a step back. Maybe it is a trick of the light, I thought, but my breath caught in my throat. Maybe it is just a person, someone lost like me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. No person could move like that. And why would anyone be out here, in this forsaken place? The whispers grew louder, pressing in from all sides, making my skin crawl. They weren't T-words anymore, they were guttural sounds, broken fragments of language, foreign and ancient. I couldn't understand them, but they felt wrong. They felt alive in a way that made my body stiffen with dread. I stepped backward again, my feet scraping against the dry leaves, but that only seemed to pull the figure's attention toward me. Its head turned, slowly, impossibly so. The movement was too smooth, too fluid and natural. And that is when I saw its face. Or what was left of it. At first, it looked like it could have been human almost. There were eyes hollow and dark, set too deeply in the face. But the skin was stretched, taut over bone, so pale it looked like it had been bleached by the sun. Its mouth, if it could even be called that, was wide, unnaturally so, as if it had been carved into the face by something desperate. And it opened, just a little, just enough to let out a sound. A low, raspy breath. It was like a sigh, or a hiss, but there was something more in it. Something hungry. My breath caught. My legs turned to lead. It stepped forward again, closer now, just at the edge of the archway. I could feel the ground tremble beneath me, a low, vibrating hum that made the air feel thick, like it was alive, like it was breathing. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen. Every inch of my being was telling me this was wrong. This wasn't real. But it was. The figure extended one long, spindly hand, and its fingers each one impossibly long, with nails that curved like claws reached from me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with the scent of rot, and that smell, the same one I had noticed earlier, was stronger now, overwhelming. It was everywhere, sinking into my skin. No. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't obey me. It was like something was holding me in place, keeping me tethered to the spot. My pulse quickened, my mind raced with thoughts of escape, but it was too late. The figure was almost upon me. Then a sound crack pierced through the silence. The ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled, my foot slipping on a loose stone. In that instant, the figure lunged, its hand grabbing for my arm. I screamed. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to break free, yanking my arm away from its grasp. I staggered backward, tripping over the rocks and roots as I tried to flee. My breath was ragged, my mind consumed with nothing but escape. But the figure didn't follow. It stayed there, its hands still stretched out, the dark eyes watching me as I ran. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the main path again, gasping for air, my legs trembling beneath me. The woods around me seemed to breathe, to shift, to close in, but I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. As I stumbled through the trees, something in my mind clicked. This isn't just a forgotten path. It was more than that. It was a place where something old, something dark, had been waiting. And now that I had found it, I wasn't sure it would ever let me go. I don't remember how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and bend as I stumbled back down the path, heart pounding, breath shallow and erratic. The sounds of the forest, the wind, the burrs, the rustling leaves seemed muffled, distant, as if the woods themselves had fallen silent in the wake of what I had seen. But even then, the whispers didn't stop. They were there, in the back of my mind, growing louder, more insistent. They weren't just sounds anymore, they were thoughts, crawling under my skin, twisting through my mind like invasive vines. I could feel them pulling at my sanity, dragging me back to that broken archway, to that thing in the woods. What was that? I asked myself over and over. But there were no answers, only more questions, each one leading to darker thoughts. Was it real? Was I just losing my mind out there in the woods? I reached the edge of the path, where the trees finally began to thin out. My legs were shaking so violently that I could barely stand, but I kept walking, my eyes darting nervously between the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, even though I knew I had left the figure far behind. The air felt colder now, even more oppressive than before. Suddenly, the smell of decay hit me again, sharp and pungent. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. The familiar smell from the forest was back, and it was stronger this time. It burned in my nose, thick and choking, making my stomach twist. I turned to run slowly, half expecting to see the figure from the archway right behind me, but there was nothing. I looked to the left, then to the right, trying to steady my breath, but that's when I noticed it, a faint, irregular line in the ground, barely visible, like something had been dragged through the dirt. I kneeled down, the movement slow and cautious, my eyes following the path of the mark. It led deeper into the woods, back the way I had come. I shouldn't have followed it. I knew I shouldn't. But something, some dark compulsion, pulled me in. My legs moved on their own, my body betraying my mind as frantic attempts to turn around and leave. I followed the mark through the trees, my senses heightened, every crack of a twig beneath my feet sounding like a gunshot in the heavy silence. The woods had changed. The once peaceful path felt sinister now, the air thick with an unknown tension. The whispers still swirled around me, louder now, though I couldn't make out the words. It was as if they were just out of reach, but growing stronger, more persistent. I walked for what felt like hours, though the sun hung in the sky, casting a cold, unnatural light across the forest floor. And then I saw it. A small clearing, barely large enough to fit a couple of people. In the center was an old stone structure, partially hidden by vines and thick underbrush. It was round, almost like an altar, with jagged edges worn smooth by time. The stones had been weathered and cracked, yet they still seemed strangely alive. There was a presence there, a weight to the air that made my skin crawl. The mark in the dirt led directly to it. My heart hammered in my chest, and the whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices pressing against my skull. They weren't just in my head anymore. I could hear them, feel them, as if the ground itself was speaking to me. Without thinking, I stepped forward, my feet dragging across the dirt, my legs heavy with dread. I was close now, too close. The air was thick with something foul like the scent of death and decay. The further I moved into the clearing, the more the whispers intensified. They felt urgent, desperate, like a warning. I reached out a trembling hand, brushing against one of the stone walls, and in that instant the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The stones groaned, an unsettling sound that echoed through the clearing. Then I heard something else. A voice. Not a whisper, not a murmur, but a voice clear and chilling. You should not have come. I jerked back, my heart racing. The voice was low, guttural, like it came from the depths of the earth itself. I spun around, looking for the source, but there was no one. No one in the clearing but me. I am losing my mind, I thought, but even as the words formed in my head, I knew they weren't true. The air around me was thick with the feeling of something ancient, something dark and hungry, just waiting to be awakened. I turned to run, but the ground beneath my feet shifted again, and I stumbled. The stones beneath me cracked open, revealing an opening dark and deep like a gaping mouth. Without thinking, I reached out to steady myself, my hand brushing against the edge of the stone. But as soon as I touched it, the air exploded with noise. The whispers, the voices, everything merged into a cacophony of sound, filling my mind with images I couldn't comprehend. Faces, figures twisted and blurred, danced in front of my eyes. Then came the laughter. Not just one voice, but 1,000 echoing in the woods in my mind. A laugh so twisted, so broken that it made my stomach churn. I pulled my hand away from the stone and stumbled back, my heart pounding, my legs unable to carry me. My breath was ragged, my vision spinning as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The air grew colder still, and from the depths of the opening in the stones, something stirred. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could describe. But I felt it. It was coming. And this time there was no escape. I couldn't breathe. The laughter that echoed around me was deafening, 1,000 voices twisting together into a chorus of madness. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the cold ground, my body shaking uncontrollably. I could feel the air thickening, pushing in from all sides, suffocating me. The whispers, the voices, the laughter, they weren't just in my mind anymore. They were everywhere. They had weight. They had substance. I forced myself to look up, to focus on the gaping crack in the earth, the yawning mouth in the stone, where something was stirring, something dark, ancient, and unfathomable. The air around the crack rippled like heat off pavement, distorting everything around it. It wasn't just the ground moving. The air itself seemed to be bending, stretching, warping as though it was alive. I reached for my breath, gasping for air, but it was like the air itself was thick, pushing down on me, dragging me into the earth. My vision was blurry, my body weak. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the crack, even though every instinct in me screamed to run, to escape. Something shifted inside the hole. A shape dark instinct moved beneath the earth, slowly as if it was waking up. As if it had been waiting, lying dormant for centuries, and now it was stirring, feeding off the fear in the air, feeding off my own terror. The ground around the opening trembled slightly, as if something massive was shifting beneath it. Then came the eyes. They emerged slowly at first from the depths of the earth. A single eye. Or at least that's what I thought at first. But then I saw that there were more dozens of eyes, all opening at once, their lids peeling back, revealing irises that were deep, unblinking black. They gleamed with an unnatural shine, glowing in the dim light, watching me. They weren't human eyes. Not even close. They were too large, too wrong. Some were oval, others circular, all different sizes, yet they moved together in a grotesque unity, following me as I trembled in place. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my skin crawled, and my stomach twisted with a nausea I had never known. No. This can't be real. I tried to stand, to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey me. It was like the ground had become sticky, like something invisible was holding me in place. The more I fought to move, the more I felt like I was sinking, slowly being drawn into the earth, pulled toward the eyes, pulled toward whatever it was that waited beneath. The whispers grew louder again, their voices blending into a single, unified cry. It was like they were calling to me, urging me closer. Come closer. I felt the urge to crawl toward the crack. Not from my own will, but from some unseen force, some ancient pull that I couldn't escape. The eyes were watching me, never blinking, never moving. But I could feel them. I could feel them inside my skull, burrowing into my brain. You are here for a reason. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, a sob clawing its way up from deep inside me. I knew, deep down, that I had come here for something. Something they wanted me to find. But I didn't know what. I didn't know what this was. All I knew was that I couldn't escape. There was no escape. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. A person, barely visible in the shadows, standing just beyond the crack in the earth. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the mind, a figment of my overactive imagination. But no. It was there. A silhouette too tall, standing motionless, watching me. The figure seemed to be made of the very shadows themselves, like it was part of the dark, merging with it. It wore a cloak, but it was tattered and torn at the edges, and its face was hidden beneath the hood. But I could feel its eyes on me too. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, and my body was shaking violently. I had to get away. I had to. The figure moved. It didn't walk. It didn't step. It just shifted, as if the shadows were its domain, as if the very fabric of reality bent to its will. It was right there, just in front of me, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. It reached out a hand, but not with fingers. It was a long, fluid motion, like the hand was part of the shadow itself. The fingers stretched unnaturally, curling toward me, just inches away from my face. "You cannot leave," it whispered. The voice was low, almost non-existent, like it was coming from the earth itself, from the cracks in the stone, from the very bones of the world. I tried to back away again, but the earth beneath me gave way, crumbling, and I fell. I fell into the darkness. The figure, the eyes, the laughter, everything was gone. The moment I hit the ground, it was as if the world shifted, as if the reality I had known was suddenly slipping away. I was falling through nothingness, a pit of blackness, deeper and deeper. The last thing I remember was the feeling of the earth closing in on me, and the overwhelming sense that I was no longer just lost in the woods. I was lost in time, and time had no mercy. I woke up, but not as I had expected. The world didn't return to the familiar chaos of the forest, nor did I find myself surrounded by the comforting emptiness of night. Instead, I found myself in a place that had no name, a place that should not exist. The ground beneath me was soft, unnaturally so, like the soil had been replaced with something foreign, something that gave way as my feet made contact, but not in a natural way. The surface seemed to pulse, as though alive. Every step I took, the ground shifted beneath me, undulating with the rhythm of something that was breathing. It felt wrong. The air was thick and oppressive, as if it was soaked with history, heavy with memories that weren't mine. A faint, suffocating fog clung to the ground, swirling in slow spirals, but not a single breeze stirred. I struggled to stand, my body aching as though it had been pulled through 1,000 miles of stone, my head pounding like a drum. The memories of the fall of the earth swallowing me whole were a blur. It felt as if I had been gone for centuries. I could feel the lingering echo of those dark eyes watching me, but when I looked around, there was nothing but the oppressive fog and the stillness. A distant sound reached my ears, barely a whisper at first, like a breath caught in the wind. But as I focused, the sound began to grow clearer, sharper. A rhythmic tapping. Slow, measured, like the sound of footsteps, but in no particular order. I turned in every direction, but all I saw was the same unsettling fog, rolling and curling like a living thing. It was as though the ground and the air had no distinction. The horizon didn't exist here, the sky a seamless expanse of grey, like I was trapped in some endless, shifting void. The tapping grew louder, closer. I took a step forward, my legs unsteady, and then another. My eyes scanned the fog, looking for any sign of life. And that's when I saw them. Shapes, figures emerged from the mist, not walking, but gliding. They were like shadows, just barely formed, indistinct, with outlines that flickered and shifted like they were made from the very fog itself. They didn't move like humans. They didn't walk or run. They just shifted. Glided closer with a fluidity that made my stomach churn. There were too many to count. Some seemed to be floating just above the ground, while others crawled on all fours. They all had the same glowing eyes, just like the thing from the forest, but their eyes they weren't just watching me. They were waiting for something. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound of tapping was now all around me, everywhere. A deep, incessant rhythm, as though the very fabric of the strange place was alive, resonating with a pulse that had no beginning and no end. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, cracked, as though the very air had stolen my voice. The shapes circled me, but they never came too close. They just watched. Their eyes were endless pits of blackness, unblinking, unfeeling. There was something incredibly wrong about them, like they existed in this world, but not in the way I understood things. They were something ancient, something that had no place here. But they were real, more real than anything I'd ever known. The mist parted suddenly, revealing a figure standing in the distance. It wasn't one of them. It was taller than anything human, and it wore that same cloak, ragged at the edges. The cloak shimmered in the haze, but it was dark, too dark to see clearly. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt its gaze. It was staring directly at me, its eyes like knives, cutting through the fog, through my thoughts, through everything. The voices in my head swelled to a deafening roar. I couldn't make sense of them. The words were in different languages, languages that didn't exist in the world I knew. It was like they were communicating in ways that defied understanding, speaking to the very core of me, pulling at something deep in my mind that I didn't even know was there. And then it spoke. The figure's voice, like the deep rumble of an ancient storm, sounded within my chest rather than my ears, a vibration that shook my very soul. You are here. Its voice wasn't a question, but a statement. An undeniable truth. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My legs moved of their own accord, taking steps toward the figure. I couldn't stop it. It was like my body no longer belonged to me. The closer I came, the more the mist seemed to part, as though the figure was the only thing that could pierce the dense fog. The fog thickened again, clinging to me, drowning me in its stifling presence. My lungs burned. You will understand soon enough, the figure continued, its words sliding into my mind, filling the spaces between my thoughts. I took another step forward, against my will. The ground beneath me shifted, and I could feel the pulse, the deep, rhythmic heartbeat of this place, throwing me in. I tried to resist, but the pull was too strong. The figure's hands, long, thin, and covered in tattered black cloth, reached out, not toward me, but toward the fog. It moved its hands with deliberate slowness, like it was manipulating the very air. The fog parted at its command, revealing a massive stone structure. It wasn't just any structure. It was something ancient. The stones were cracked, covered in strange runes, their surface liquid with a substance I couldn't identify. The structure rose up in the center of the fog, too massive to take in all at once. It was a structure that didn't belong in this world, a place where time had no meaning, no form. And at the top there was a symbol I recognized. The same symbol I had seen carved into the trees back on the path. The same one I had found on the altar. The forgotten path was never meant to be found. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let us continue. Have you ever wondered if the ground beneath your feet is alive? I never did, until that day. It all started with a visit to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The kind of place you only hear about in ghost stories, where the tombstones are cracked and the air smells of damp earth and forgotten memories. The cemetery had always been a place I avoided, though I couldn't exactly tell you why. It wasn't that it was terrifying, at least. Not at first glance, but there was something about it, something about the way it sat there in the middle of nowhere, untouched by time, that made my skin crawl. But that day, something was different. The fog hung low, wrapping around the grave markers like a blanket, and the sun was barely a memory. It was the perfect kind of gloomy weather for a place like that. I walked through the iron gates, the hinges creaking like an old man's bones. The wind whispered through the trees, and I felt it something lingering in the air, as if it knew I was there. I wasn't sure why I had come. Curiosity, I guess. Maybe it was the feeling of isolation, the sense of being removed from everything that made me step into the cemetery that day. Maybe it was just the knowledge that there was something out there, something I could never quite reach or understand, but that didn't stop me from trying. The ground was soft beneath my feet, a mixture of damp earth and moss, and the path that wound between the graves was barely visible, swallowed by the fog. As I walked, I noticed how quiet everything was. Not just the absence of noise, but a thick silence, the kind that made every step seem louder than it should be. Every time my foot touched the earth, I could feel it, as if the ground itself was reacting to my presence. And then I saw it. The first footprint. It was small, barely noticeable at first, hidden between two weathered gravestones. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the shadow of a passing bird, or maybe even my own footstep from before. But then I looked closer. The ground around the footprint was dry, untouched. The footprint itself, however, was glowing faintly as though the earth had given birth to it under some unnatural force. I took a cautious step back. I tried to shake the feeling that had begun to settle in the pit of my stomach. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a trick of the light. I had been in a cemetery for too long, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I looked down again. Another footprint, just a few inches away from the first. And this one was brighter. The glow was unmistakable now, a pale light that seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. It wasn't the kind of light that should be there, not in a place like this, not under the heavy grey sky. It was too unnatural, too wrong. My heart began to race. I could feel my breath quickening, and yet I couldn't turn away. My feet felt heavy as if the ground was holding me in place, urging me forward. It wasn't the first time I had felt this way, this unease, this overwhelming sensation that something was following me, just beyond my reach. But this time was different. The air around me felt thick, as though it was charged with something unseen, something dark. The footprints. They were leading me somewhere. I didn't want to follow them. I knew I shouldn't but my feet betrayed me, stepping forward despite my hesitation. One after the other, I followed the glowing trail. The footprints seemed to multiply, appearing just ahead of me, each one shining brighter than the last. My pulse quickened with every step. The air was no longer cold, but oppressive, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. As I walked deeper into the cemetery, I could hear something else, something that wasn't just in my head. A soft, faint whispering, as though the wind itself were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It made my skin crawl. My thoughts were beginning to unravel the line between reality and what I felt was becoming harder to define. I should be turned back. I should be run. But I couldn't. I was drawn to those footprints, to the faint glow that seemed to pulse with some unspoken promise. It felt like I had no choice, like I was moving towards something inevitable, something that had already been set in motion long before I had ever entered the cemetery. The whispering grew louder, clearer. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was voices. Hundreds of voices, murmuring just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt them. Felt the weight of them pressing in on me, urging me forward. And then I saw it. The source of the footprints. A grave, older than the rest. The stone was cracked and weathered, the inscription barely readable. But it was the symbol carved into the top of the stone that caught my attention. It was a strange, twisted mark, unlike anything I had ever seen. I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to it, and that's when I saw it. The last footprint. It wasn't glowing. It was dark. Black as midnight, and as I stared at it, I felt a sudden chill crawl down my spine. The air grew colder, the fog thicker. And then, just as I reached out to touch the stone, I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, echoing in my mind. It has begun. I didn't know who said it, or what said it, but the moment those words echoed in my mind, everything around me changed. The whisper stopped. The ground trembled beneath my feet. I could hear something moving, something massive, shifting beneath the earth, and the footprints, they were no longer glowing. They were fading. Fading into the soil, as if they had never been there at all. But something else remained. The feeling of being watched. And the sense that I was no longer alone in that place. I took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of it pressing down on me. I turned to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. There was a sound soft at first, like a sigh, but then louder. A scratching, scraping sound from beneath the ground, coming from all around me. And then, just as the realization struck me, I heard its footsteps. Not mine. Not anyone else. They were coming from all sides, and they were getting closer. I ran, but it was already too late. The footsteps had found me, and the curse was only just beginning. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The footsteps, those cold, relentless footsteps, were closing in, echoing in the thick fog, and my legs were moving on their own, pushing me faster, harder. The cemetery had turned into a labyrinth. The familiar gravestones now twisted into distorted shapes, and the fog pressed in like a suffocating blanket, narrowing my vision to mere feet ahead of me. Run, I told myself. Just run. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like a war drum, urging me onward. The ground was uneven beneath my feet, and every step I took seemed to send a wave of panic crashing over me. I felt as though the earth itself was alive, shifting and groaning beneath my weight. The whispers of the voices had stopped, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing second. I could feel their eyes on me, or it. Whatever was chasing me. The cold breath of something ancient, something evil, seemed to brush against my neck. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see it. The darkness, the thing that had been left behind when the footprints had vanished. But I never saw it. And yet I could hear it. The footsteps, they weren't in sync with mine. They were slower, dragging, as though something was trying to catch up, but didn't quite have the strength to move as quickly as I did. I stumbled over a loose stone, my ankle twisting painfully, but I gritted my teeth and kept running. The cemetery stretched endlessly ahead, the fog swallowing everything, disorienting me. I was lost. There was no escape. Every path seemed to lead to the same place. The scratching sound came again from beneath the earth, but it was louder now. Closer. I could almost feel the vibrations beneath my feet, the ground trembling like someone was trying to break free. The low groan of the earth shifted into something more urgent, more menacing. And then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't the whispering I had heard earlier. This time it was clear. Unmistakably clear. Don't run. The words were like a slap in the face, their coldness biting into my skin. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second everything went still. The footsteps stopped. The ground stopped trembling. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. I turned around, though I knew I shouldn't have. I knew deep down that looking back was a mistake. But it was too late. There, standing at the far edge of the cemetery, just beyond the graves, was a figure. It was too tall, and its silhouette was dark, almost blending into the night. The shape shifted, contorting as though it didn't belong in the world of the living. I could barely make out its features, but I didn't need to see them to feel the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over me. It wasn't human. I knew that now. I tried to move, but my body felt like stone. My legs wouldn't obey. And the more I stared at that figure, the more I felt myself being pulled toward it, as though some invisible force was guiding me, dragging me closer, inch by inch. The figure took a step forward. That is when I realized it wasn't he alone. Behind it, emerging from the fog, were more figures. Dozens of them. Tall, dark shapes, like shadows stretched across the ground, moving with a natural grace. Some walked on 2 legs, others on all fours, their heads too large, their limbs too thin, their movements jerky and unnatural. They all stood in a line, watching me. And as their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, I could hear the sound of scratching, dragging, scraping. I couldn't breathe. And then, in one swift motion, the figure in front of me spoke. The voice was deep and guttural, echoing in my mind rather than my ears. Welcome to the end. Before I could react, the ground beneath me shifted violently, and I was thrown to the ground, my face smashing against the damp earth. My hands scraped against the gravel as I pushed myself up, panic gripping my chest. My pulse hammered in my ears, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I was gasping for air, but it felt as though the air had turned thick, suffocating. I stumbled to my feet, heart racing, and I ran again. This time I didn't stop. I couldn't but the cemetery was no longer just a place of gravestones and fog. It was a labyrinth of twisting paths, changing at will. The trees had bent and grown closer, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes, as though they were alive and aware. The wind had turned into a roar, whipping around me, tugging at my clothes, and the footsteps were back. Closer now. They were right behind me. I could feel their presence, like a shadow wrapping itself around me. I didn't need to look over my shoulder to know they were there. The scraping sound was unmistakable, growing louder with every step. I ran faster, stumbling over roots and branches that seemed to appear out of nowhere. My body ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out of here. I had to escape whatever was chasing me. And then, just as I thought I might collapse from exhaustion, I saw it. The cemetery gate. The iron bars were twisted and bent, but they were open. A sliver of light cut through the fog beyond. I could almost taste freedom, but I wasn't alone. A figure stepped out from the mist just ahead of me. Its face, if it could be called a face, was twisted, a mass of eyes and mouths, each one moving independently, whispering words I couldn't understand. The voice from earlier echoed in my mind again, louder this time. Too late. And then I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder, sharp as ice. It dug into my skin, freezing me in place. The rest of the figures were closing in, surrounding me. I was trapped. The ground beneath me started to tremble again, and I could hear the scraping, scratching noise getting louder, louder, until it was all I could hear. The earth was alive, moving, shifting, and it was pulling me down. I screamed, but no sound came out. And then everything went black. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air as though I had been drowning. My chest heaved, and the cold, damp earth beneath me pressed into my skin like a reminder that I was not in the safety of my home, but still trapped in that cursed cemetery. I blinked rapidly, my mind trying to catch up with my racing heart. The fog was still thick around me, but the figures, the creatures, were gone. The cemetery stood in eerie silence, as if nothing had ever happened. The sound of my own breath was deafening in the quiet, but I knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. I pushed myself up, my body sore and disoriented. My hands were caked in dirt, and there were sharp, painful scratches across my arms. The faint glow from the cemetery gate, just beyond my line of sight, flickered like a dying flame. I felt drawn to it, but fear gripped me, twisting my insides. I wasn't sure what I had just experienced, if it had been real, or if it had all been some kind of nightmare. But the marks on my arms, the dirt under my nails, they felt real. I stumbled forward, my legs barely supporting me, and it wasn't long before I found myself standing at the threshold of the cemetery gate. The rusted iron bars creaked softly, swaying in the wind. The mist rolled around them, curling like tendrils, urging me to step forward. I hesitated. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, to run in the opposite direction, but my body was frozen, rooted in place. I had to leave. I had to get away from this place. But something inside me, some primal instinct, was telling me that the gate wasn't the answer. It wasn't the escape I thought it was. Then something moved in the fog. It was a shadow at first, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. But it was enough to make me turn my head sharply, my pulse leaping in my throat. There was a figure. The same one. The one I had seen before. It stood just past the gate, its shape now clearer in the pale light. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. But it wasn't the height or the twisted limbs that made my stomach churn, it was the face, or rather, the absence of one. It was a black void. A hollow, empty space where a face should have been, with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a dark abyss that seemed to swallow the light around it. I took a step back, my breath shallow and quick. The cold sweat that had formed on my skin turned to ice, and the sound of the wind shifted. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was something else. A low, guttural growl. A hum that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet like the earth itself was speaking, calling out to me. The figure as head jerked toward me, and I felt the pressure, like the weight of its gaze was pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, frozen in terror. I couldn't even look away. And then I heard it. A whisper. "Why did you come here?" It was a voice, but not a voice. It echoed in my mind, a deep, resonant tone that reverberated through my skull. It wasn't just the question that terrified me, it was the understanding that the figure knew something I didn't. It knew me. It knew what had brought me here, why I had come to this cursed place in the first place. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, choked by the fear that now gripped me. "Leave," the figure growled. "You cannot escape what has already begun." And with those words, the ground beneath my feet began to shake once more. This time the tremors were stronger, more violent, as if the earth itself was fighting to tear me apart. The fog thickened, swirling around my legs like chains, pulling me down, dragging me back toward the cemetery. I tried to move, tried to run. but my legs were heavy, as though the earth was refusing to let me go. The air was growing colder, the mist wrapping around me like icy fingers. The cemetery was alive in a way I could never have imagined. The figure took a step toward me. Slowly. Steadily. It didn't need to hurry. It knew I couldn't escape. I felt it again. That chilling sensation of being watched, of being hunted. The footsteps started again, far away at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They were closer now, moving toward me at an unnaturally fast pace, the scraping, dragging sound becoming more distinct. I wasn't alone anymore. From the mist, other figures began to emerge, dark shadows, twisted shapes, moving with strange, jerky movements. They were the same as before. Tall and naturally thin, their features obscured by the thick fog, but their eyes glowing faintly pierced the darkness, fixated on me. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The voice from earlier echoed again in my mind, louder this time. You are not meant to leave. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a gravestone, and I fell hard onto the cold earth. The fog was so thick now I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet. The footsteps were almost deafening, moving closer. I could hear their breathing, ragged and deep. But it wasn't the breathing of one. It was the breathing of many. And then, as I lay there, paralyzed with fear, I realized the truth. I had never been alone. The cemetery was alive with those creatures, those shadows. They had been here long before I ever set foot on this cursed ground. And now they were coming for me. I could hear them now, more than one. The soft shuffling of feet in the mist. A low, rasping breath that seemed to echo through the fog, as though it were coming from all directions at once. They were close, far too close, and I knew I had no time left. My mind screamed at me to get up, to run, but my body refused to cooperate, my limbs like lead, heavy with terror. I rolled over onto my back, trying desperately to push myself up, but the mist was growing thicker by the second. It felt like it was pressing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs, making each breath more difficult than the last. The ground trembled under me as the footsteps neared, a faint scraping sound followed by a chilling silence that only made the tension grow sharper. Then I saw them. The first figure emerged from the mist, towering over me, its long, spindly limbs bending and twisting unnaturally with each movement. Its face, or rather the lack of one, was even more disturbing up close. That black, featureless void stared down at me, its presence somehow colder than the fog itself. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, as if the very air around me was suffocating my voice. The creature took another step toward me, its movement slow and deliberate, and at this, when I realized the others were behind it, forming a circle around me, I was surrounded. The mist seemed to bend around them, pulling inwards as if they were the center of some dark ritual, a circle that I could not break, no matter how hard I tried. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stared at the creature before me. It wasn't just fear I felt. It was dread. A feeling that something far worse than death awaited me if I didn't escape. One of the figures, slightly smaller than the others, stepped forward, its limbs jerking in a grotesque fashion. I could hear the faintest whisper now, as if the air itself was speaking. You should have never stepped into this place. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. It wasn't even coming from the creatures. It was as though it was emanating from the very earth beneath me. I felt the cold fingers of panic grip me tighter. WH, what do you want? My voice came out broken, raspy. The creature tilted its head to the side, its hollow eyes fixated on mine. Then it spoke again, but this time the words were far more sinister. The curse has already been cast, there is no escaping now. I didn't understand. I didn't know what curse it was talking about, but the words felt like a weight on my chest, like a noose tightening around my throat. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and I was thrown backward, the world spinning around me. When I hit the ground, a sharp pain shot through my body, but I could barely feel it over the terror that consumed me. The creatures moved closer, their limbs bending in unnatural angles as they loomed over me. The air grew colder still, the fog swirling like a storm around them, and I could see the faintest glow emanating from the footsteps they had left behind. Those strange, pulsing lights like the stars themselves had fallen to earth began to glow brighter, each footprint leaving a trail of shimmering light that seemed to grow and stretch across the cemetery. The ground beneath me shifted again, and I felt something cold and wet brushing against my skin. I looked down, and my heart stopped. The earth was alive. The soil beneath me seemed to pulse and writhe, as though something was crawling underneath it, something vast, something ancient. The footprints, those cursed glowing footprints, were not just lights. They were markers, traps, guiding the creatures toward me. And now I was in the middle of it all. Why? Why are you doing this? I croaked desperation in my voice. The figure that had been closest to me, its limbs twisted at impossible angles bent down, its black, hollow face hovering just inches from mine. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, seeping into my very bones. It whispered again, but this time its voice was not just in my head. It was in my skin, in my blood, in my soul. You walked these cursed paths, touched what should have been left alone. Now you were bound to it. There is no turning back. I tried to scramble away, my legs finally responding, but they were weak and steady, and the fog seemed to drag me back, as though the very ground beneath me was unwilling to let me go. I glanced around, desperate for an escape, but the figures had surrounded me completely. The air grew thick with a suffocating weight, and I felt as though the ground beneath me was pulling me down, threatening to swallow me whole. Then I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, but this time they weren't coming from the creatures. They were coming from somewhere deep within the mist, coming closer, growing louder, more urgent. And they weren't just footsteps. They were the sound of something alive. The creatures seemed to sense it too. They froze, their dark faces shifting slightly, as if they were unsure of what was happening. The footsteps grew louder still, echoing through the fog. They were closing in on us. And then in the distance I saw it. A figure. A silhouette in the mist. It was moving rapidly, but there was something wrong about it. It was too fast. Too unnatural. The figure darted between the graves, its shape flickering, vanishing and reappearing in the fog like a ghost caught in a nightmare. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing, it wasn't one of them. No, the creature beside me hissed, its voice filled with dread. It is here. It should not be here. I didn't need to understand what was happening. I could feel it. The balance had been disturbed, and something far worse than the creatures had arrived. My legs finally gave way, and I collapsed, the world spinning violently around me. And then through the darkness, I heard it again. A scream. A voice, not mine, but one that was filled with an agony far greater than I could comprehend. It echoed across the cemetery, rising and falling, its pain palpable in the air. The creature stiffened, and for a moment even the mist seemed to freeze in place. And then it was gone. Everything fell silent. The silence was deafening. For a moment I lay there, unable to move, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my ears. The creatures, they had frozen, their twisted bodies still as though caught in some kind of trance. The very air felt thick with tension, as though the mist itself was holding its breath. I couldn't tell how long it had been since the scream pierced the fog. Time felt distorted here, twisted by the presence of whatever it was that had arrived. The footsteps louder now was still echoing in my mind. The things around me, the creatures, their hollow eyes were fixed not on me, but on whatever was drawing near. I could feel their fear, their trembling in the air, even though they had no faces to show it. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble, a low rumble vibrating through the soil. Was it an earthquake? No. The earth was alive, and it wasn't just the creatures who were reacting to the unknown force. I felt a deep pull within me, an overwhelming urge to look at the shadows in the distance. My gaze shifted slowly, almost involuntarily, toward where the figure had been. I could still see nothing clearly. The fog had thickened, swirling in strange, unpredictable patterns, and the shadows it cast were no longer natural. They were shifting, moving on their own, as if they had a mind of their own, like dark hands reaching for me. Suddenly, the sound of rapid movement broke the stillness. It was fast, too fast, and in a blink, the figure appeared, darting from the depths of the mist. It was enormous. The shape was impossibly large, its outline flickering and out of existence as it moved toward me. There was a sharpness to its form, an unsettling jaggedness, as though it was constantly rearranging itself, its edges constantly shifting. I could feel my pulse quickening as it drew closer, my body frozen in place as if the very air had turned to concrete. My mind screamed for me to run, to escape, but I was paralyzed, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of it. It was not a creature in the way I had known creatures to be. It was something other. It didn't walk like the creatures, it glided, its massive form undulating with every motion. The mist parted in its wake, as if the very fabric of reality was bending around it. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the figure, its distorted, incomprehensible shape moving toward me, its presence stealing the very air from my lungs. There was no face. There were no eyes, no mouth, no features I could recognize. But there was something about it, something sickening, something that told me it was aware of me, that it was watching me, even though there was no face to look into. I closed my eyes, trying to pull myself together, trying to fight the wave of panic that threatened to swallow me whole. I couldn't just lie here. I couldn't stay here. But my body refused to listen to my mind. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs were frozen, my muscles locked in terror. "You have seen too much," the voice whispered, not from the creature, but from everywhere. It was in my mind, my soul. The words reverberated through me like a drumbeat, the sound pulling at something deep within me, something ancient. "This is your end." It was at that moment I understood. This thing wasn't just an observer. It was an enforcer of the curse. The scream, the footsteps, the terror, it had all been leading to this. The mist around us was now so thick I could barely see my own hands. The air was cloying, heavy with the weight of an impending doom I couldn't escape. The creatures behind me had begun to shuffle once more, their natural movements slow and deliberate, but their attention was now entirely on the being that towered above me. I dared to look up again. The figure was mere feet away, its impossible size filling my vision. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in sensations. A ripple of cold surged through me, a freezing chill that seemed to pierce my very bones. The air buzzed with energy, as if the world itself was unraveling. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The mist collapsed inward, as if it had been drawn back into the earth. The ground beneath me rumbled once more, the earth shaking violently as though a massive weight had been lifted from it. For a moment I thought I might be swallowed whole by the earth, that the mist would close in and suffocate me. But it didn't. The silence returned. I had no idea how long I had been lying there, completely motionless. The creatures were gone, vanished as if they'd never existed. The fog, too, was beginning to recede, retreating into the distance. I was left alone in the clearing, the grave standing silently around me, as though nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I tried to stand, but my legs were too weak. I barely managed to push myself upright, my body trembling uncontrollably. The world felt raw and distorted, as though it had been changed in ways I couldn't fully understand. I staggered forward, each step unsteady as I moved through the clearing, my eyes darting around, waiting for the ground to shake again, for anything to emerge from the mist. But there was nothing. Only the stillness of the cemetery, the graves standing silently like sentinels watching over me. But then I felt it again. A presence. A weight. A watching. I turned quickly, my heart leaping in my chest. But there was nothing behind me. Nothing except for the footprints. They were still there. The glowing footprints, each one pulsing with that strange light, stretching out into the mist. The same footprints I had followed earlier. I felt the cold touch of dread wash over me once more. The curse wasn't over. It had only just begun. As I turned and began to walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led somewhere. A place I had no choice but to go. And all I could do was follow the light. Have you ever received a message that made you question everything you thought you knew? I am not talking about a simple text or an email, but something more. Something that makes you doubt your memories, your reality, and maybe even your very existence. That was how it began for me. It was an ordinary evening, or so it seemed. The sun had set hours ago, and the faint glow of my phone screen was the only light in the otherwise dim room. I had just finished work and was scrolling through social media, trying to unwind from the day. My mind was half on the screen, half on the quiet hum of the house around me. There was a certain stillness that filled the space, an unsettling silence, but I didn't think much of it. After all, this was my apartment, nothing unusual about it. But then I noticed it. A new notification appeared on my phone. It wasn't from any app I recognize. No sender, no message preview, just a strange icon. The symbol looked like nothing I had ever seen before, dark, angular, almost like an abstract shape that kept shifting the longer I stared at it. It wasn't a typical notification. In fact, it felt almost forbidden. There was a magnetic pull to it, something that made my fingers hover over the screen before I even knew I was moving. I hesitated, a feeling of unease creeping up my spine. But curiosity got the better of me, as it often does. I tapped on the notification. The screen flickered for a second, and then I was faced with a single line of text. "You have memories you don't remember." It was strange, disturbing. The words felt like a weight in the air, pressing against my chest. It was a message that shouldn't have existed as something beyond the simple interface of an app. A strange, invasive thought began to creep into my mind. What did it mean? What did I forget? I tried to shake it off. It was just a weird message, maybe a prank, or some glitch in an app I didn't recognize. But there was something about the way it made me feel. It was as if I had stumbled into a reality I wasn't meant to see. I glanced at the sender's name again. There wasn't one. It was as if the message had appeared out of thin air. I closed the app and went back to scrolling, trying to push the strange words from my mind. But they lingered. The words echoed in the back of my thoughts. You have memories you don't remember. The night went on, and the message stayed with me. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, but it was like a shadow lurking just behind my thoughts. My phone buzzed again. A new notification. This time there was no hesitation. I opened it immediately, as if something was pulling me in. You are being watched. The words were clear this time, direct and chilling. My stomach turned. I looked around the room, suddenly feeling very aware of the quiet. Too quiet. It was as if the house had changed somehow, become foreign, unfamiliar. The walls felt like they were closing in. I checked the time. It was late, much later than I had thought. The silence seemed more pronounced, more oppressive. I glanced at my phone again. No sender. No app name. The message was just there. My fingers hovered over the screen. I wanted to delete the app, to stop whatever was happening, but I couldn't. I didn't know why, but there was something compelling me to keep reading. The memories are not yours. I felt a cold shiver run through me. It was as if the room had suddenly become colder, and I could swear I felt eyes on me, watching from the corners of the room. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My pulse raced, and my hand trembled as I held my phone. The darkness of the room seemed to deepen, and for a moment I felt the strange sensation of being pulled into something much larger than myself. The words on my phone didn't just seem like a message anymore. They felt like a warning, a threat, and somehow I felt connected to them like I had always known what they meant. You are not alone. The final message left me paralyzed. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling was undeniable. Whatever was happening, it was real. It was too real. The silence in the room was deafening now, suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in it. I had to get out. I had to leave this place. But every time I tried to move, I felt like something was keeping me in place, like invisible hands holding me to the spot. The room felt smaller, darker, and my mind raced with fear. The messages were starting to make sense, but in a way that twisted my understanding of reality. I stared at my phone again, but this time the screen was black. The messages were gone. The app was no longer there. My heart sank. I stood up, moving towards the door, but something stopped me. I looked down at my hand, noticing the faint glow of something, an unfamiliar symbol on my palm. It was small, like a burn, but it hadn't been there before. It was the same shape as the icon that had appeared on my phone. I backed away, horrified, as the room seemed to close in around me. The air was thick with something I couldn't see, but I could feel it. The weight of it. The darkness. And then I heard the sound. A soft tap 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 from the other side of the door. It was faint, but it was there. Someone or something was waiting for me. I wasn't he alone. The room was no longer familiar. It was something else. Something I couldn't comprehend. And that was when I realized the app was only the beginning. I had opened something I couldn't close. The tapping on the door didn't stop. It wasn't urgent, but it was steady, almost like a rhythm. Slow, deliberate, each tap feeling like it was in sync with my heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, staring at the door, my hand still hovering over the doorknob. My breath felt thick, as though the air had turned to molasses, weighing down my chest. I glanced back at the screen of my phone, but it was still black, void of any messages, void of any sign that the app had ever existed. Had I imagined it all? The strange symbol, the cryptic words, the feeling of being watched. My fingers trembled as I put the phone back in my pocket, but the sense of dread only grew stronger. The tapping continued. I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind, or perhaps the old building settling. After all, this was an old apartment, full of creaks and groans at night. I turned the doorknob slowly, half expecting the air to snap back to normal once I opened the door. But when I stepped into the hallway, I could feel a shift in the atmosphere, as if the air itself was charged with an unnatural energy. The hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, looked unchanged. The same faded wallpaper. The same worn floorboards. Yet something was different. The silence in the air had deepened. The tapping had stopped, but now I felt it in the pit of my stomach, the sensation that I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched had evolved into something more tangible. It was like an invisible force pressing down on me, closing in. I glanced at the door to my neighbor's apartment across the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and a thin sliver of light leaked out, casting an eerie glow on the floor. But there was no movement, no sound. No sign of anyone inside. I reached for the light switch, but before I could flip it, I froze again. Something was off. There was a low hum now emanating from the walls, almost imperceptible but persistent. It was the kind of sound that made your bones vibrate just slightly. My mind raced. Was this real? Was this some kind of prank? But then my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out cautiously, feeling the cold sweat on my palms. The screen lit up, and once again there was no sender, no name, just a single cryptic line of text. You were getting closer to the truth. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I looked around the hallway again, but now it felt even smaller, more oppressive, like the walls were closing in on me. The tapping had resumed, this time coming from behind me. The rhythm was unmistakable, like footsteps following just a few paces behind. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. No one. The hallway seemed normal again, just a narrow stretch of old wood and peeling wallpaper. But the feeling wasn't gone. It was suffocating, crawling up the back of my neck. I wanted to run. To bolt. To escape, but my feet were glued to the floor. Something was stopping me, something unseen. And then, in the dim light, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't cast by anything. It was just there, dark, unnatural, stretching along the floor. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but as I focused, I could see it moving. Slithering, like a slow, deliberate crawl. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back. The shadow shifted and extended towards me, inch by inch. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find the air to do it. I was paralyzed, caught between flight and paralysis. The message on my phone flashed before my eyes again. It's already inside you. That was it. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold wave of panic washed over me. Inside me? What did that mean? Was it some kind of virus? Had the app infected me? Was I losing my mind? The shadow was closer now, growing longer, more distinct. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a physical presence, something that shouldn't be there. My legs finally moved, and I backed away from the door, away from the hallway. But as I turned to retreat back into my apartment, I heard something behind me. A voice. Low and distinct, but unmistakably there. Dawn run. I froze. The voice was chilling, but it wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling that came with it. A sense of doom. I whipped around, but there was no one. Only the shadow, still creeping forward. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, breathing heavily. I leaned against the door, trying to steady my pulse. My mind was racing. What was happening to me? Was this a nightmare? A hallucination? I needed to get to the bottom of this before whatever was following me consumed me whole. I grabbed my phone again, desperately searching for some kind of explanation. I opened the App Store, hoping for a clue, but when I searched for anything even remotely related to the strange app, nothing came up. Not a single trace of it. No history, no downloads. It was as if it had never existed. But I knew better. It had been there. I had seen it. And now it had left something behind, something I couldn't see, but I could feel. I stumbled over to the window, throwing open the blinds, desperate for some normalcy, something to ground me. But as I peered out into the city below, I noticed something strange. The streetlight flickered in an odd, rhythmic pattern. Thump, thump, thump. And then, in the reflection of the window, I saw it. A figure standing in the shadows just at the edge of the alley. The figure didn't move, but I knew it was watching me. I could feel it. It was too late. I wasn't running from this. I was already trapped. The app was only the beginning. I couldn't stop looking at the figure outside my window. It didn't move, not even the slightest shift. But I knew it was there, watching me. My skin prickled with an instinctual fear, one I hadn't felt since I was a child, when every creak in the house felt like a monster lurking just out of sight. I moved away from the window, my pulse thrumming in my ears, my breath shallow. The figure, if it was even real, wasn't the only thing I had to worry about. The app, the shadow, the voice. They were all connected somehow. But how? And why me? I collapsed onto the couch, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling me under, but my mind refused to quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, the app's logo flashed in my mind, a dark symbol that seemed to twist and writhe in the darkness. The app had done this to me, I knew it. But how? The phone buzzed again, louder this time, and I jumped, the shock of it almost sending me off the couch. It was the same number, the same mysterious sender, but now the message was different. You shouldn't have opened it. I stared at the screen, trying to process the words. I felt something I couldn't explain pulling at the edges of my sanity. The walls felt closer, the air thick and suffocating. I tapped on the message, my thumb shaking, as if this simple action could give me some sort of control over whatever was happening. Suddenly, the screen flickered. Once. Twice. And then it went black. My heart dropped into my stomach. I smacked the phone against my palm, trying to get it to respond. Nothing. The screen remained dark, mocking me with its unresponsiveness. But then I heard it. A faint sound at first, like the buzz of a broken circuit. The phone hummed. Not the usual buzz. This was different. It was more like a low, mechanical whine, followed by a faint whisper, almost imperceptible, but distinct enough that I couldn't ignore it. It is too late. I jumped to my feet, my breath catching in my throat. The voice. It was there again. This time, it didn't come from the phone. It came from within the walls deep, behind the plaster, somewhere far too close. I pressed my hands against my ears, desperate to block it out, but the whispering continued, growing louder, merging with the hum of the phone. I grabbed the device and tossed it onto the kitchen counter. The whispers didn't stop. They grew, multiplying, spiraling around me until they filled the room like a heavy fog. Stop! I screamed, but my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the endless murmur. I turned on every light, hoping that the brightness would dispel the darkness closing in around me. But the whispers didn't care. They kept coming. They kept growing. In a panic, I ran to the door, thinking I could escape the voice, the app, the shadow. I grabbed the doorknob, but the moment my hand made contact, a chill ran through me. My fingers were numb, like I had been holding something cold for far too long. I jerked my hand back, staring at the door as though it had betrayed me. And then, in the silence that followed, I heard it. A faint tapping. The tapping was coming from inside the walls, just as the voice had. But this time, it wasn't a rhythmic sound. It was erratic, frantic, like something trying to claw its way out from behind the blaster. I backed away, shaking my head trying to make sense of it all. Was this real? Or was it just some terrible hallucination brought on by the stress of the situation? The symbol. The shadows. Everything was merging together, twisting into something unrecognizable. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, until it stopped abruptly. And then, just as quickly, the phone buzzed again. I stumbled toward the counter, my fingers shaking as I picked it up. The screen lit up, but this time, it wasn't a message. It was a string of numbers, binary code. 1,110,111, 1,100,1,001, 1,110,000, 101,101,111,001. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. The code was like a riddle, something that wanted to be solved, but I didn't know how. And then the words appeared, replacing the code. You read the key. The key. What did that mean? My head spun as I tried to piece it all together. The app, the symbol, the whispers, the shadows. It was all connected. But how? What did it want from me? I tossed the phone aside, trying to think, but my mind felt like it was closing in on itself. I pressed my palms against my temples, but nothing made sense. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, the room grew cold. I spun around, my eyes darting to the window, the walls, the floor. But there was nothing there. And then the tapping returned. Louder. Closer. It wasn't from the walls this time. It was coming from the other side of the room. I turned, heart pounding, breath shallow. The shadow was back. Only this time it wasn't just on the floor. It was moving. The silhouette stretched across the room, writhing, like it was trying to form itself into something more. Something alive. Something real. One. The voice whispered again, louder now, a command, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, where nothing obeyed the laws of reality. The shadow, no longer a simple silhouette, had taken form. It wasn't human, but it wasn't completely alien either. Its outline was shifting, constantly changing, as though it was being pulled in different directions. And in the middle of it, I saw its eyes. Eyes staring at me from within the dark mass. It has time. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't matter. My body reacted before my mind could. I turned and bolted for the door. But before I could reach the handle, something cold and dark gripped my ankle. It wasn't a hand, but it felt like fingers made of something far worse than flesh. The shadow was pulling me back into the darkness. And I was helpless. My heart raced as the shadow yanked me backward. The cold, inhuman grip around my ankle tightened, dragging me toward the dark corner of the room. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the growing hum that filled the air. The hum wasn't just sound, it felt like it was vibrating deep inside my chest, vibrating through my bones. I kicked, my foot slamming against the floor in a desperate attempt to free myself, but the shadow didn't relent. Instead, it pulled harder, dragging me toward the spot where the dark mass had taken form. The more I struggled, the more it seemed to wrap around me, like it was absorbing me into itself. Ah! I screamed, the word barely escaping my lips. In the chaos, I managed to grab the edge of the counter, my fingers barely catching hold of it. I dug in with all my strength, pulling myself away from the relentless force that tried to consume me. But the shadow had a power that defied logic, and no matter how much I fought, I couldn't break free. I looked toward the door. It felt miles away. Then the whispers began again. But this time they weren't just words. They were patterns. Patterns that echoed in my mind, like fragments of a code, fragments that were becoming clearer with every moment. You read the key. The voice repeated the same message, but now it felt like it wasn't just speaking to me. It was speaking through me, as if the code had unlocked something deep inside. I felt the words resonate in my very core. 1,110,000, 111, 1,000,000, 101,000, 1,000,000, 110,000, 101,000,000, 101,000, 111,001. The numbers flashed in my mind again, those binary digits, the strange riddle that I had seen earlier. But this time, I didn't just see them, I understood them. I saw the app S symbol, the one that had haunted my thoughts since it first appeared on my phone. The dark, shifting shape that didn't quite resemble anything. It flickered, just like the shadow, shifting and bending in a rhythm I couldn't quite grasp. The more I tried to comprehend it, the more I felt my mind slip. It was as though the app had invaded my thoughts, the lines between reality and the code blurring into something unnatural. I couldn't tell where the app began and where I ended. Was I losing myself to it? The shadow moved closer, its shape now flickering like a distorted reflection in a broken mirror. I could see something forming within it, a face, or at least something that resembled a face, but its features were warped. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely, something far darker. And the eyes. The eyes were endless voids. They seemed to pull at my very soul, dragging me closer to the abyss. It was too late, the voice was began, its tone more insistent, like a countdown to something inevitable. I tried to fight back. I tried to scream, to move, to break free from the grip of the shadow. But everything around me was melting, warping into something alien. The walls distorted, bending and stretching as if they were made of liquid, pulling apart like the pages of a torn book. The phone, which had fallen to the ground, flickered again. For a brief moment, the screen glowed just enough for me to see a new message. But this time, the message was different. It wasn't just text. It was a command. Join us. The words flashed on the screen, then shifted, rearranging themselves until they spelled something else. A new phrase appeared. You are the key to unlocking the code. The words pulsed, glowing brighter with each repetition. I could feel them vibrating inside my skull, resonating with something deep inside me, like a key turning in a lock. The shadow moved closer still, its form now almost touching me. My breath came in ragged gasps. The face within the darkness was closer, its distorted features now clear enough to see. It was smiling, a twisted, sick smile that sent waves of nausea through my gut. But it wasn't human. It was something far worse. Join us. The voice whispered again, but now it wasn't just the app speaking. It was the shadow. It was the code. It was everything around me. I felt my fingers loosen from the counter. I didn't even realize I was letting go. My body betrayed me, moving toward the figure, toward the void, toward the darkness that promised to swallow me whole. But then a crack. A sound like glass shattering, sharp and sudden, filled the room. The app on my phone flickered again, this time showing the binary code in full. 1,101,010, 1,101,000, 111, 1,000,000, 101,000, 1,000,000, 101,000, 110, 100,001. I didn't understand it at first, but then I felt it. I knew it. It was a command. A command to stop. Something inside me broke free of the hypnotic pull of the shadow. I slammed my hand against the phone, desperate to end the connection, to stop the pull of the code. The phone cracked under the force, but the app didn't disappear. It stayed there, pulsing with that same insistent tone. It was too late, I realized. The app had already started something inside me, something I couldn't undo. The shadows were moving, slowly now, no longer pulling at me. But I knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The app wasn't done with me yet. I had unlocked something, and now it was inside me. The dark code, the whispers, the void, it was all intertwined, and I couldn't escape it. My eyes darted to the door again, but it was still just out of reach. I had no choice but to turn back and face what was coming, because it was already here, and it was waiting. The crack in the phone screen seemed to glow with an eerie light, a faint pulsing that matched the rhythmic hum still buzzing in the room. I stared at it, as though in trance, knowing deep down that it was more than just an app. It was a gateway, one that I had opened, perhaps even willingly. The fear that crawled up my spine was not just for what was happening, but for what I had invited to happen. I stumbled back from the phone, suddenly aware of how much the room around me had changed. The walls weren't just bending anymore, they were alive, breathing in and out, as though the very structure of my apartment was shifting into something foreign, something otherworldly. I felt the air grow heavy, thick with pressure, as if the space around me was growing tighter with each passing second. And then I heard the whispers. They weren't coming from the phone anymore. No. Now they were all around me. Join us. It was a chorus of voices, all layered over one another, as if thousands of people were speaking at once, their words garbled and unintelligible. But the message was clear. I was the key. The shadow, the one that had been so close before, had receded slightly. But it was not gone. It loomed, ever present, like a cloud hovering just out of sight, waiting for the moment when it would descend again. I backed up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, as the floor beneath me began to hum, vibrating with an energy I couldn't begin to understand. The hum grew louder, turning into a low growl, as if the room itself was alive and was beginning to feed off my fear. The walls of those once sturdy surfaces were now covered with symbols. Strange, twisting shapes that seemed to writhe and squirm, as though they were alive, and they were inching closer, creeping along the walls toward me. I had seen those symbols before, in the app. But now, they were not just code, they were physical, tangible. They were the app manifesting in the real world. I needed to get out. I turned to the door, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But the door, it wasn't where it should have been. It was there, but it was distorted. The frame twisted and bent like the walls, and the air around it shimmered with a strange, unnatural light. Please, no, I whispered more to myself than anything else. Please let me leave. I rushed toward the door anyway, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on me, the suffocating sense that I was trapped in something I couldn't control. As I reached for the door handle, I hesitated. It didn't feel like a normal door. It felt wrong. My hand shook as I grasped the handle, but I couldn't turn it. The door wouldn't open. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent. Join us. I pulled harder, desperate now. But the more I tugged, the more the door seemed to resist, as though it were refusing to let me leave. I could feel this dark presence in the room, just beyond my vision, pushing back against me, forcing me to stay. I turned around, my breath shallow, panic rising in my chest. The shadow had grown again, stretching across the room. It was no longer a simple form. Now it had texture, something almost liquid, flowing like tar, crawling over the floor and up the walls. It was reaching for me. I could hear it. Every inch it moved felt like a second being torn away from my life. But then I remembered. The app. The message. You are the key to unlocking the code. That was it. I had to know. I needed to understand the code. I needed to stop it from consuming me, from consuming everything. I grabbed the phone from the floor, the cracks green glowing in my hands, and opened the app once more. The binary code flashed on the screen again. 1,101,101, 1,110,000, 101,1,110,000, 101,110,010, 1,100,001. The same message, but now I saw it differently. It wasn't just random numbers anymore. It was a phrase. A command. Mutate. I didn't know what it meant at first, but then the shadow grew even larger. I felt it tightening around me, wrapping around my chest like an iron band, squeezing the air from my lungs. My vision blurred, and I could feel my fingers go numb from the pressure. Mutate. I was no longer just trapped by the app, I was part of it. Somehow it had seeped into me, twisting my thoughts, my very essence, into something it could control. The walls continued to pulse, the symbols continuing to twist and writhe. My body was now as much a part of the code as the app itself. It was in me, through me, and it wasn't stopping. The words, those numbers, were more than just a key. They were an infection. Please, please stop. My voice trembled. I wasn't sure if I was begging it to stop or if I was begging myself to stop this madness. But I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to stop. Then the app flickered again. The binary code shifted, rearranged itself into a new string. 1,110,011, 1,110,000, 101, 1,000,000, 100,011, 1,000,000, 100,011, 1,000,000, 100,000, 101. It was the word success. I didn't know what success meant in this context. But somehow, I knew one thing for certain: it wasn't over. I had completed the cycle. The app had done its work. And now I was part of it forever. The shadow moved in one final time, its form solidifying around me. I could feel it pulling me in, enveloping me completely. My body was no longer my own. My thoughts no longer mine. Everything felt disconnected. Everything felt wrong. But one thing remained. The app. And now it controlled everything. The world around me melted away into darkness. And then there was nothing. Oh, you made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.